Shalom, shalom. This week's parsha is Parshat Tetzaveh, which for the most part talks about the big day kahuna, the clothing for the Kohen, the priest, the high priest, that they were supposed to make. And this ties in very much with the story of Purim. Well, I'll get to why and how. But it's also Parshat Zachor, where we're commanded to hear this pasuk that we go to shul and we hear them talk about to remember that Amalek attacked our nation when we were exhausted and faint, and we were on our way when we were out leaving Mitzrayim and on our way by Derech, we were headed towards the Holy Land. And they attacked the weak amongst us, and they they did not fear God, and they are seen as despicable in the eyes of God because they didn't they were against anything that the Jewish nation and God stood for. They were against. They despised that, and they preyed on the weak and attacked them when they were weak because they they didn't believe in God. They were the antithesis of everything Judaism and God stands for. And God said, these people cannot exist. You're supposed to destroy all of them. There was a war when they attacked Israel, when they left Egypt, but not all of Amalek was destroyed at the time. And there was a commandment to remember what they did and to utterly blot them out. And so we read in this week on Shabbat, the Haftorah we read is about this story where Shaul, the first king of Israel. Now let's backtrack a little bit. It was a time where the Jewish nation did not have a king, and they requested a king from the prophet Shmuel. Shmuel was getting on in years, and they saw that his children wasn't following his ways, and they wanted a king. And they said, "We want a king to be like the rest of the nations." And this really upset Shmuel greatly, and he tried to convince them that not to have a king. And the problems that would be, there would be taxes, they'd have to go out to war, they'd have to uh, give all sorts of things, and all the bad things that come along with the king. He tried to explain to them. They said, we don't care. We want a king like the rest of the nations. Now, this is always a very big problem with our nation when we only want to be like everybody else. We want to put on a show and be like everybody else because the nation did not need a king at that time. At that time, they had a temple, they had a Kohen Gadol. A Kohen Gadol, a high priest, really took care and function of anything that they would want from a king because he was a leader for the people. If there was a question about battle, he can consult God and get an answer and tell them what to do. And he can guide the people in every which way and how to have success. This was a leader that was comparable to a king, but he was spiritual. He was a spiritual leader. And they weren't looking for that simply spiritual. They wanted to be everything the show like the other nations had at the time, this king and everything that went along with it. And it was a problem because, and we're even told that the Kohen Gadol, when we learn about the big day Kahuna in this week's Parsha and Tetzaveh, all the different things that the Kohen wore, it's reminiscent of royal garb. The Radak even says in Yechezkel when it talks about the mitznefet, the crown that the Kohen Gadol wore, it says mitznefet is a word crown used for royal crown. And that's all these things that the Kohen Gadol wore. And the stones, the beautiful different colored stones on the Choshen HaMishpat that he wore on his breastplate, all the things that he wore was indication that he was holding a royal position, a spiritual royal position. And this should have sufficed for the nation. But it did not. And they requested for the first king, and finally God relents and he tells Shmuel the prophet to anoint Shaul as the king. Shaul was very tall and very handsome, and he was a modest man, and he was a good choice to represent the nation because that's what they wanted, a whole show. And here we get this really tall, gorgeous, good-looking man, and then God infused him with the spirit of God and wisdom, and he was a good choice. But the problem was when Shmuel the prophet came to him, and God told him that he has to eradicate Amalek, go to war with Amalek. It's time, and do not have mercy. Kill all of the people, kill all of the livestock, don't leave any alive, don't have pity, don't have mercy. These people are evil. You got to kill every single one of them. And the problem is now that this king who the nation wanted, and why the nation wanted, because they didn't have the self-respect, the self-confidence to understand that they were different from the other nations because they were special and they had something unique that was even better than what the nations had. And they wanted to lower themselves because they wanted to be like the others. They worried, they felt small in their own eyes. And what happens is the nations always get a leader which they deserve. And that even though Shaul was a great man, he was low in his own eyes also. And he did not eradicate all of them. Like he left the king Agag and he left the best of the livestock. Why? Because he said that that's what the people wanted. And he wasn't strong enough to, even when he knew what was right to do and he had instruction from the prophet straight from God, he had to do what the people wanted, and the people had to do what the nations wanted. And this is a problem. And because he didn't, he listened to the people, and he kept the best of the livestock. He said to give sacrifices to God, and he had mercy on the king Agag and didn't kill him. um, God was angry, and God told Shmuel what happened, and Shmuel went and confronted Shaul, and Shaul said, "I did everything the word of God," and he didn't. He didn't. And Shmuel says, "Well, then what's the bleating of the sheep that I hear, and what's that noise?" And he's like, "Oh, but the people want it, and we're going to sell them sacrifices." And Shmuel says, "God doesn't want your sacrifices. He wants you to listen to what he wants. Don't distort everything and say you're doing this for God when that's not what God wants." And it was a problem. And because he left Agag, King Agag, alive, and the reason why I think he left King Agag alive, by the way, everything so psychologically makes sense, is because there was probably this um, projection. You know, he's a king, Agag's a king, and he probably just thinks, oh, Agag was just following the people like I follow the people, and he had mercy on him because he probably thought it wasn't his decision. But that wasn't the case. Agag was evil. He was Amalek. He stood for everything that Amalek, as a king, he wanted to destroy the nation. And in the interim, before Shmuel was able to get to him and kill him, he was able to sleep with a woman, and this woman reproduced, and that was where Haman came from, Agagi, from King Agag. And then, as we know in the story of Purim, he wanted to still carry out that mission. He wanted to destroy our nation. And it all comes from these insecurities that our nation had to want to be like the rest of the world, and the insecurity that our King Shaul had, that he had to listen to the people and let them lead instead of leading in what he knew was right. And this is a problem. It's an insecurity and that takes away from who we are, takes away from our strength and our power. And I think our strength and our power is exactly the opposite of when it uses these words that Amalek attacked us on the way, right? When we're on our way, on the derech, the way of God. And it says because the nation was ayef v'yagea. Now this word ayef and yagea, it's like they were, when it's a very exaggerated word of like depressed, of have no more energy. The life force has gone out of the nation. Anything that had compelled them to go and to do, and they had lost all that because they lost that force, and that's why they were able to be attacked by the Amalek. And the problem is, right, is that when we're not strong, when we're not full of that sense of being empowered by who we are, by our mission, by God, if we believe in God and we believe in who we are and we follow the system, that's then we're coming from a power and source of strength. And then we can win and we can have God with us and go with God and follow him and not um, lose heart and not be subject to destruction. And I think that's what happened in the story of Purim. They wanted to be like the rest of the nations, and that's why they were scattered and about. They dispersed amongst the people at the time. And Achashverosh, who was the king, he took the big day kahuna, the garments, the priestly garments. He took the kalim, he took all of the utensils, and it says when he had those feasts for 100 and whatever days, he had his feast, and he used um, when he invited the Jews to their party, to his party, and he used the utensils, and he donned the priestly um, garments. And at the time, I think that was a very in Persia, they were open. They followed all the different cultures of the time. They were trying to be very inclusive. They wanted everybody to be a part. The only thing that the king wanted was to be the king of kings. That's what it says that they said at the time. And I think Achashverosh was trying to show when he took the big day kahuna and he wore the garments of the Kohen Gadol. I think what he was trying to convey to the Jewish people is that, I am now um, taking the place of what you used to have in the temple. The Kohen Gadol who you would go to, you don't need to go to him anymore. I am your king. Here you can have all your stuff here. And he wore the the crown and all the clothing, and he tried to show the people. And the irony is this is what happens to our nation is when we want to be a part of all the other nations, then we end up getting slapped in the face by being ruled by the other nations. And we put ourselves in that position. We want to be like them, and then we end up being ruled by them, and then God forbid, end up being destroyed instead of turning to God and to the precious things that we have and to value what we have. Um, and we don't. And it's sad that we just don't value and we want to be like everybody else when we have a special position. And I think that we read this to try and remind ourselves that we need to appreciate and we don't need to be embarrassed. We don't need to try and be like everybody else. We need to embrace the beauty that we have in our Torah and in God. And that's our victory. That's our victory, to be unique and special just by being good and Torah observant, following God, and let that shine and come through. That's the real victory for us. And God willing, we should all get there and to be able to feel that and not be subject to the other nations ever again. Shabbat Shalom.